What do mushrooms think about? September 8, 2021. They think? In 2000, Professor Toshiyuki Nakagaki, a biologist and physicist at the Japanese University of Hokkaido, took a sample of a yellow mold and placed it at the entrance to the maze, which is used to test the intelligence and memory of mice. At the other end of the maze, he placed a sugar cube. Physarum polyscephalum smelled like sugar and began to send its sprouts in search of it. The spider webs of the mushroom bifurcated at each intersection of the maze, and those of them that fell into a dead end turned around and started looking in other directions. For several hours, mushroom webs filled the maze passages, and by the end of the day one of them found its way to sugar. After that, Toshiyuki and a group of his researchers took a piece of the spider web of the mushroom that participated in the first experiment, and put it at the entrance of a copy of the same labyrinth, also with a Sahara cube at its other end. What happened amazed everyone. In the first instant, the cobweb branched into two. One sprout made its way to the sugar, without a single extra turn. The other climbed the wall of the labyrinth and crossed it directly, along the ceiling, straight to the goal. The mushroom web not only remembered the road, but also changed the rules of the game. I dare to resist the tendency to treat these creatures like plants. When you do mushroom research for several years, you start to notice two things. First, mushrooms are closer to the animal kingdom than it seems. Second, their actions sometimes appear to be the result of a deliberate decision. I thought the mushrooms should be given the opportunity to try to solve the riddles. Toshiyuki Nakagaki. Further research by Toshiyuki found that mushrooms can plan transport routes as well and much faster than professional engineers. Toshiyuki took a map of Japan and placed pieces of food in places corresponding to major cities in the country. He put the mushrooms in Tokyo. After 23 hours, they built a linear web of cobwebs to all the pieces of food. The result is an almost exact replica of the rail network around Tokyo. It is not that difficult to connect several dozen points, but connecting them efficiently and most economically is not at all easy. I believe that our research will not only help us understand how to improve infrastructure, but also how to build more efficient information networks. Toshiyuki Nakagaki. Riddle of another being. According to conservative estimates, there are about 160,000 strains of fungi on Earth, most of which have impressive abilities. For example, in Chernobyl, a mushroom was discovered that feeds on radioactive products and, at the same time, cleans the air around it. This mushroom was found on the wall of a destroyed nuclear power plant, which for many years after the disaster continued to produce radiation that destroys all life within a radius of several kilometers. While exploring the Amazon forest, two biology students at Yale University found the fungus Pestalacciopsis microspora, which can degrade plastic. This ability was discovered when the fungus ate the petri dish in which it was grown. Until now, neither our science nor our technology is capable of this. Plastic contamination is one of the biggest technological problems. Today we have high hopes for this fungus. Professor Scott A. Strobel geneticists from the American Institute of Bioenergy have succeeded in making the mushroom strain faster to digest the natural sugar, xylose. The potential significance of this discovery lies in the creation of a new, cheap and fast way of producing clean biofuels. It would seem, how can a primitive organism, without a brain and limited in movement, perform miracles beyond the control of science? To try to understand the world of the mushroom, you must first clarify something. Shiitake, portobello and campignon are not only the names of edible mushrooms. Each of them is a living organism, representing a network of millions of thinnest cobwebs underground. The mushrooms peering out of the ground are just the fingertips of these cobwebs, the tools with which the body spreads its seeds. Each such finger contains thousands of spores. They are carried by the wind and animals. When the spores fall into the ground, they create new webs and germinate with new mushrooms. This creature breathes oxygen. It is so unusual from a biological point of view that it belongs to its own kingdom, separated from both animals and plants. But what do we really know about this life form? We do not know what prompts the underground system of cobwebs at a certain moment to release mushrooms to the surface of the earth. Why one mushroom grows towards one tree and another towards another. And why some of them produce deadly poisons, while others are tasty, healthy and fragrant. In some cases, we cannot even predict the timeline for their development. Mushrooms can appear in 3 years, or even 30 years after their spore has found a suitable tree. In other words, we do not know even the most basic things about mushrooms. Michal Pollan, researcher, Queen of the Dead. It is difficult for us to understand mushrooms because of their anatomical structure. When you take a tomato in your hand, you are holding the whole tomato in your hand as it is. But you cannot pluck a mushroom and examine its structure. A mushroom is just the fruit of a large and complex organism. The web of cobwebs is too thin to be cleared of soil without damaging it. Skula Mosby, microbiologist. Another problem is that most forest mushrooms cannot be domesticated and are very difficult to grow, both for research and for industrial purposes. They choose only a certain litter. They themselves decide when to germinate. Often their choice falls on old trees that cannot be transferred to another place. And even if we plant hundreds of suitable trees in the forest and spray billions of spores on the ground, there is no guarantee that the mushrooms will be obtained at a reasonable time. Michal Pollan, researcher. The nutrition, growth, reproduction and energy production systems of fungi are completely different from those of animals. They do not have chlorophyll and therefore, unlike plants, they do not directly use the energy of the sun. Champignons, Chiateague and Portobello, for example, grow on a litter of wilted plants. Like animals, mushrooms digest food, but, unlike them, they digest food outside their bodies. Mushrooms secrete enzymes that decompose organic matter into its components, and then absorb these molecules. If soil is the stomach of the globe, then mushrooms are its digestive juices. Without their ability to decompose and recycle organic matter, the earth would have suffocated long ago. Dead matter would accumulate endlessly, the carbon cycle would be interrupted, and all living things would be left without food. Michal Pollan, researcher. We focus on life and growth in our research, but in nature, death and decay are equally important. Mushrooms are the undisputed rulers of the kingdom of death. Therefore, by the way, there are so many of them in cemeteries. But the biggest secret is the enormous energy of the mushrooms. There are mushrooms that can crack asphalt, glow in the dark, process a whole bunch of petrochemical waste overnight, and turn it into an edible and nutritious product. The Copenopsis atramenteria fungus is able to grow a fruiting body in a few hours and then, in one day, turn into a puddle of black ink. Hallucinogenic mushrooms change people's minds. There are poisonous mushrooms that can kill an elephant. And the paradox is that they all contain tiny amounts of calories that researchers usually use to measure energy. Our way of measuring energy don't seem to fit here. Calories characterize solar energy stored in plants. But mushrooms are weakly associated with the sun. They germinate at night and wither during the day. Their energy is something completely different. Internet under the ground. The mycelium is the complex infrastructure on which all the plants in the world are located. In 10 cubic centimeters of soil, you can find 8 kilometers of its cobwebs. The human foot covers about 500,000 kilometers of closely spaced cobwebs. Paul Stamets, mycologist. What happens in these webs? In the early 1990s, the idea first emerged that the web of these cobwebs not only conveyed food and chemicals, but was also an intelligent and self-learning communication network. By looking at even small sections of this network, it's easy to recognize a familiar structure. The graphic images of the internet look exactly the same. The network branches, and if one of the branches fails, then it is quickly replaced by workarounds. Its nodes, located in strategic areas, are better supplied with power due to less active places, and are enlarged. These webs have sensitivity, and each web can convey information to the entire network. And there is no central server. Each web is independent, and the information it collects can be transmitted to the network in all directions. Thus, the basic model of the internet has existed at all times, only it was hiding in the ground. Postmets, mycologist. The net itself seems to grow indefinitely. For example, in the state of Michigan, a mycelium was found, which has grown underground to an area of 9 square kilometers. It is estimated to be around 2,000 years old. When does the chain decide to grow mushrooms? Sometimes the reason is the danger to the future of the network. If the forest feeding the network burns out, the mycelium stops receiving sugars from the tree roots. Then she sprouts mushrooms at the most distant ends, so that they spread fungal spores, free her genes, and give them the opportunity to find a new place. This is how the expression mushrooms after rain appeared. The rain washes organic rot from the ground and, in essence, deprives the network of its power source. Then the network sends rescue teams with disputes in search of a new refuge.
A nightmare for insects. Finding a new home is another thing that distinguishes mushrooms from the animal and plant kingdoms. There are mushrooms that spread their spores just like fruits spread their seeds. Others produce pheromones that make living things compulsively crave them. White truffle gatherers use it to search for pigs, as the smell of these mushrooms is similar to that of an alpha boar. However, there are more complex and cruel ways of spreading fungi. Observation of the West African ants of the species Megaloponiraphodens recorded that they climb tall trees every year, and with such force they pierce their jaws into the trunk, that after that they cannot free themselves and die. Previously, there were no cases of mass suicide of ants. It turned out that insects are acting against their will, and someone else sends them to death. The reason is the smallest spores of the fungus, which sometimes manage to get into the ants' mouths. Once inside the insect's head, the spore sends chemicals to its brain. After that, the ant begins to climb the nearest tree and plunges its jaws into its bark. Here, as if waking up from a nightmare, he begins to try to free himself and, in the end, exhausted, he dies. After about 2 weeks, mushrooms sprout from his head. On trees in Cameroon, you can see hundreds of mushrooms growing from the bodies of ants. For fungi, this power over the brain is a means of reproduction. They use the legs of an ant to climb a tree, and the height helps the spread of their spores by the wind, so they find themselves new homes and new ants. The Thai zombie mushroom mafia Cordyceps unilateralis encourages the ants that feed on it to climb the leaves of certain plants. The distance that the infected ants travel for this is much greater than the distances in their normal life, and therefore, having reached the leaves, the insects die of fatigue and hunger, and after 2 weeks mushrooms sprout from their bodies. These creatures are perhaps the most amazing of all I've seen. We believe they produce LSD-like chemicals, but we have yet to come across drugs that induce behavior in someone's interest. Professor David Hughes. Hughes discovered fungi that control the brains of spiders, lice, and flies. This is not coincidence, natural selection, or byproducts of another process. These insects are sent against their will to where they should not be, but mushrooms like. When we transferred the infected ants to other leaves, the mushrooms simply did not germinate. Professor David Hughes. How the antibiotics were invented. There is also a positive side to the fact that mushrooms can produce strong poisons. Some of these poisons are effective weapons against our common enemies. For example, microbes. The best antibiotics are found in mushrooms. Paul Stamets, mycologist. Out of 160,000 species of mushrooms, whose bodies contain complex chemical compounds, science has been able to decipher and reproduce only 20, and among them several essential medicines have been found. There is a reason mushrooms produce medicines. They always grow in the worst places, damp, hot, in places that are factories of microbes and viruses. Most plants have no protection from these factors, but fungi resist. The well-known drug Lipitor, which is one of the few known solutions to cholesterol and diabetes, was found in the red Chinese mushroom. And enoki and shiitake mushrooms are included in the basket of medicines received by cancer patients in Japan. Eleanor Shavit, mycologist. Unfortunately, the variety of mushroom medicines is constantly decreasing. The reason is the destruction of woody forests, especially in the Amazon basin. Along with other life forms, we also destroy mushrooms. The number of their varieties is constantly decreasing, and this worries me for purely selfish reasons. The world has presented a stunning gift, a huge natural laboratory for the manufacture of drugs. From penicillin to drugs for cancer, AIDS, flu, and senile diseases. The ancient Egyptians called mushrooms the god of death for a reason. Today we are consistently destroying this laboratory. Paul Stamets, mycologist. Stamets talks about the Fomitopsis fungus. Discovered in 1965, this mushroom has proven to be an effective remedy for tuberculosis, and today it grows in only 5 locations in the United States. In Europe, this mushroom has already completely disappeared. With a group of specialists, we went dozens of times to the forests, trying to find several more similar mushrooms. After much effort, we finally found one sample that we managed to grow in the laboratory. Who knows how many people this mushroom will save in the future? Paul Stamets, mycologist. Last year, Stamets joined the U.S. Department of Defense's Biological Defense Program and helped in the search and conservation of 300 rare species of mushrooms. We did an experiment. We collected 4 heaps of garbage. One was used by us as a control. In the other 2, we added chemical and biological substances that decompose garbage. Over the latter, mushroom spores were sprayed. Returning 2 months later, we found 3 dark-fetid heaps and 1 bright one, overgrown with hundreds of kilograms of mushrooms. Some of the toxic substances turned into organic ones. The mushrooms attracted insects. They laid eggs, from which the caterpillars hatched, and then the birds appeared, and the whole heap turned into a green hill full of life. When we tried to do the same in polluted rivers, we noted the process of cleansing from poisons. Here's what to explore. Perhaps all our pollution problems can be solved with the right mushrooms. Paul Stamets, mycologist. Where is the brain? One estimate is that it works in a similar way in mushrooms, Toshiyuki says. From a purely biological point of view, each spider web individually receives chemical signals about where to go and what to avoid. The sum of these signals creates a kind of decision-making system. In other words, the intelligence of the mushroom is in its network. Add to that millions of years of evolution under the most difficult conditions, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of different species, and you have something that should be smart enough anyway. Quotation mark. And this is your explanation of what is happening? This is the beginning.